Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books, and today I want to talk about the best books of 2018. I narrowed it down to 10. What I did was I sat down with my Goodreads list, which is what I've been using to keep track of the books that I read in 2018, and I looked at all the books that I gave 4 and 5 stars to, and then from there narrowed it down to 10, and it turned out to be a really easy process for me. Like, it was just clear to me which books had stayed on my mind, which books like I still think about sometimes, and which I really don't. So yeah, so today these are in no particular order. I basically just almost like went down the list in almost order of when I read them. So from like the oldest to the most recent. First on my list is You by Caroline Kepnes. And I read this as an ebook from my library. And wow, this story, like just the premise, I think the premise tells you whether you want to read it or not. It is about a stalker. It's a book about a stalker told from the stalker's point of view. Like, that was it for me. I knew I wanted to read it. It is a dark, twisted book, but it does keep you, it kept me really interested. It also had me siding with the stalker. Like, I felt like I got things from Joe's perspective, and I understood the logic with which he was functioning. I didn't agree with what he did, but I understood the logic he used to take the actions that he did. So yeah, really enjoyed You by Caroline Kepnes. Also, it's a TV show now. It was originally on Lifetime, and now I think it's moving to Netflix. So by the time this video goes up, you should be able to see or watch all the episodes on Netflix. I have 2 episodes left to go of it, and I just have to say, I think they did a really good job, especially with casting. Like, not all the characters look exactly how I imagine them to look, but they really do embody the characters, I feel. It's a dark and twisted one though. Just be aware. Alright, the next book on my list is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. And it's upside down. There we go. The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. And this was just such a beautiful story. From the moment I heard the premise, I also knew that I needed to read this one. It is set in modern times. It is YA. It is the story from a teenager's perspective, Star, who was in the passenger seat when a cop shot a young black man, her friend. And then it's everything that happens after the police shooting, the way it rips the community apart, the way it affects her personally and her family. And I just loved it. I loved Star. I loved her family. I felt very connected to them, and I felt like there was a lot in common between like me, my family, and Star and her family. And I just really enjoyed it. The movie came out this year, and I thought it was really well done as well. Really enjoyed it. I took my boyfriend to go see it, who had not read the book and knew very little about the story, and he really enjoyed it. So if the premise at all interests you, I think it's worth it. The next book is a romance novel, and it was probably my favorite romance I read in 2018, and it is Acting on Impulse by Sosa. This book grabbed me from the very beginning and like didn't let me go, and that's super important in a romance novel because these are really quick reads. Like, it doesn't take very long to read these, so if at any point it like lets go of your attention, it's a bad sign. And this one just did it. It's a contemporary romance, which is not the typical romance novels I read. I typically prefer historical romance. So it's just really rare that a contemporary grabs me like this. So you're following Tori Alvarez, and she is on her way to Aruba, and she like recently broke up with a famous celebrity, and on the plane she meets another famous celebrity who is Carter Stone. She doesn't know that he's a celebrity at first, and so they kind of have a little bit of romance going on in Aruba, and then they get back home and they kind of manage to find each other again. And it was just such a cute, delightful story. I love the romance. I love the side characters too. This is the first in a series, I believe. Yes, the Love on Q series. And so I'm going to keep reading the series because I just found Sosa's writing to be like just super fresh and sparkling. The way she wrote the romance and the chemistry was perfect. I enjoyed every aspect of this book, and I just like wanted to keep reading more. So next on the list is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. This is the second Neil Gaiman I've ever read, the second one this year as well. I didn't particularly like American Gods, so I thought, well, maybe Neil Gaiman's just not for me. I'm not gonna like anything he writes. Kind of like, thank you, next. And I'm glad I gave it another shot, and it was because of Murphy from Murphy Napier. I think it's just her name's the channel. But she talked about reading The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and I thought I would give it a shot. It's not a long book, super thin. I got it from my library on audiobook, and wow, this story is one of those stories that like months later now, I still remember the story, and like there's just so much to dissect in this book. It's about a man, an adult man goes back to his childhood home where he grew up, and goes back to the home where his neighbor lived, and kind of all the memories of this one moment in their childhood comes back. And it is a fantasy. It is kind of about the way evil can infiltrate a home and the chaos it can reap. And it's super fascinating. I told my boyfriend about this book, and like he found it super interesting, and we like it led to some really nice philosophical chats about it. But I don't think I'm doing the book justice. But look at go and read the premise, and I think if you haven't liked any other Neil Gaiman before, I think this one's worth a shot. It's short, so it's not a huge investment, and the audiobook I felt was really, really well done. So loved The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Okay, next up is probably the longest book I read in 2018, and that's World Without End by Ken Follet. Now, this is the second in the Kingsbridge series. So, Ken Follet, I was an author that was new to me. I'd never even heard of him, which is weird because I do a lot of history. But a lot of his books are historical, and he's done several series set in like early modern ancient period. So this one's set in early modern Britain, and you're following a bunch of characters in the town of Kingsbridge, and it's wonderful. There's a lot of themes in the story about religion, about power, about love. It's just like everything is in there, but it's really well handled. Different chapters, every chapter started from a different person's perspective, and so you get like a full sense of what it's like in this town from all these characters, good or evil. You get all of their perspectives. There is a tendency to be a little cliche with it, like characters that are bad are really bad, characters that are good are almost like angelic good, but I had no problem with it, and I felt it was pretty true to the time period, and I loved the characters, love them, because it took me so long. I think it took me a little over a month to listen to this one. Once I was done with the book, I miss the characters, like I miss them, and I think that's a sign of a really great book when you have been reading them for so long that you miss them. And I really miss the world of Kingsbridge. I read it out of order. I never read the first one. I think it's called Column of Fire, or the more recent one that's the sequel to World Without End. But honestly, I'm not interested in this town before or after the book that I read. So I think I'm good. I think I'm good just reading this as basically a standalone, even though it's part of a series. And by the way, each book in the series is set in the same town, but it's a different time period. So I feel totally okay not reading the rest of them. All right, the next on my list is I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erika L. Sanchez. And this is one of the probably most surprising books of 2018. I started reading this book, and the first 50 pages, I hated the main character. Julia. I hated Julia. I was like, oh my God, Julia. Like, who the hell hates maná? Julia hates maná. Who hates making tortillas? Julia hates making tortillas. It was just like, oh my God, girl. Everything she hates, I love. And she spends like the first 50 pages of the book like hating everything and everyone. But after the first 50 pages, it really hit me that we're talking about a teenage girl who lost her sister. When the book starts, she's already lost her older sister, Olga. And the book is about grief. It's about how her family handles grief. And this is an immigrant Mexican family living in the US with not a lot of resources. And how do you handle the death of a daughter? Like, it's just extremely difficult. And how then Julia, her younger sister, handles it. Especially when the sister seems to have been saintly. Especially now that she's dead, right? Everybody remembers her with rose-colored glasses. And she begins digging and finds that her sister was more complicated than she thought. And so, yeah, we're just following this girl. And what really hit me was that I think this girl, I'm not a lot like Julia. I didn't connect to her on some levels. But what got me was that she's a lot like my sisters. Especially my youngest sister. Like, I saw her a lot in Julia, and I think it helped me understand a little bit of it, because especially there's a significant age difference between me and my youngest sister. She was born when I was like 12 or 13, so that's pretty significant, and I've always seen her as really immature. And I think this book helped me connect to the fact that, yeah, she's immature. She's 12, 13 years younger than I am. And like, that's normal. That's normal. And she's going through stuff that I've already gone through, or maybe I didn't quite go through. And that's okay. That's okay. And this is Unknown Voices, just beautiful story. I think if you can get past the first like wave of whininess from Julia, this is a really excellent story. Okay, next up is Sadie by Courtney Summers. Sadie is a book that I listened to on audio, and man, I do recommend it. It is a really good audiobook. And let's see, how do I explain this book? It is a book about a girl, Sadie, whose sister was recently killed. She was recently murdered. And it's an unsolved murder in the town, and her mom is gone. Her mom's a drug addict that left them alone. And Sadie has been in charge of herself and her younger sister for a long time now, because the mom, she's an addict, so she never really did a good job of taking care of them. And she brought all kinds of shady men into their lives. So most of the book is Sadie's quest to find one of her mom's boyfriends. It's a really, really dark book. I almost would not recommend it for young adults. Like, I think this has a lot of really adult themes. I should say there are trigger warnings in here for sexual assault, for pedophilia, for violence. It's dark, but it is such a beautiful story. Like, it's just beautifully told, and like your heart just breaks at every step, because like, you know, this kind of story happens. It happens, and like, I just wanted to make things right for Sadie, and it's just how everyone around her fails her at every step, and it's not her fault at all. She just needed a break, and life would not give her a break. And I love it. It's a beautiful story if you're in the mood for it, because I don't think it's for everyone. But if you're in the mood for it, I highly, highly recommend Sadie. I loved it so much that I'm thinking about also purchasing the physical copy of it, because I feel like this is one of those books that like I want everybody around me to read it. It's not for everybody, so I would like be careful about who I hand it to. But I want to force people to read this one. I feel the same way about the next book that I'm going to talk about, and that is My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. I hope I said that correctly. I probably butchered it, but I love this book, and in fact, I am taking it with me as I'm traveling for the holidays because I need my siblings all to read it, and then I'm gonna tell them they can pass it on because it is just such a good book. It's a really short one too. It's under 300 pages. I think it's not even 250 pages. So it's a really quick read. I read it all in like one sitting, and as the title suggests, it's about sisters. It's about two sisters. One of them's a serial killer. So the whole point of the story isn't like the mystery. Usually you're trying to figure out who's the serial killer. No, we know who the serial killer is. But it's about sisters and about the dynamics between sisters, especially in the lengths that you were willing to go to for family. And just, it's also like about the conflicts between sisters and how that shapes both who we are and how we interact with other people. So I loved this book so much, and I'm going to be passing it on to all of my sisters, my siblings, and hopefully beyond. So highly recommended. Okay, the next book I read actually around the same time that I read My Sister the Serial Killer, and it is called I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. So this is a true crime novel. It is about the Golden State Killer, and I think this book was really enhanced for me by the backstory here, that Michelle McNamara died before completing the book, and that the serial killer was caught, I think it was like weeks within the publishing of the book. So it's a really good story. I think Michelle McNamara did a really good job of mixing in like the story of the serial killer, the story of his victims, and then her personal story. Sometimes when authors do that, it can be really like, it doesn't mix well. Like, it's really clear like that they're inserting themselves unnecessarily into the story. But the way it was handled here, I thought was really great. It was really interesting. It kept me like wanting more of the story, and after I was done, I immediately like started doing research on the serial killer and what's happening now, because it's not a fully completed story, because he hasn't entered a plea yet at court, but they did catch him. And the story of how they caught him is really interesting. I won't say anything because it's a new investigative technique that people have been using to solve cold cases, and the ethical implications of that I think are going to be really interesting, because I think it's something we're all going to need to know a little bit about. Anyways, last book that I read that I would call one of the best books that I read in 2018 is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This is another book that I don't own a physical copy, but I really want to, because it's another one of these books that like I want to share with a bunch of people. And this one's a bit more of, I think anyone can really like this book. Like if I were gifting books, which damn it, I just realized I am giving books as gifts for some people that I could have just bought a couple of these and handed them out. But I didn't think about it. Too late. Oh well. Okay, so the story begins with the main female character, who is an artist, a graphic designer in New York. Yes, and she walks out of work one day at like 3 a.m. and there's this giant statue sitting in the middle of the street in front of a Chipotle. And she's like, oh, cool art installation. And she's about to walk right by it. But instead, she stops. She calls her friend, who is like an expert filmmaker. He does videos for YouTube. And she's like, hey, come on down. Let's film a video about this thing. He does. They film this video and it goes viral, because it turns out that these giant warlike statues have appeared in most of the world's major cities, and that the material that they're made out of does not exist on Earth. So this book is about, it has that otherworldly element in it, but it's about humanity, as a lot of books about kind of extraterrestrials are. It's also about fame, social media, and like I feel like it's very much a book about now and about our time, and yet it's probably a book that will, I suspect, like stand the test of time, even though it's very much of our time, kind of in the same way that like Jane Austen books are very much about that time, but have stood the test of time. So I really enjoyed it. I think it's not, I follow him on social media, and it sounds like he's working on a sequel to it, which will be like an automatic buy for me because I enjoyed this one so much. That is it. Those are the books, my top 10 books of 2018. I have read a lot of really good books. That doesn't even include all the books, I think, that I really enjoyed in 2018. But these are the ones that I think I would recommend the most. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.